For many decades, history has shown us the horrors of the Holocaust through the eyes of the victims.
Auschwitz really was hell. We were on the last but one transport to Auschwitz, the last transport where all the prominents in Terezin who went straight into the gas chamber.
But now, disturbing CCTV footage from inside female Nazi guards' quarters is changing the narrative. How could these ordinary women transform into pleasure objects and be dominated by the male guards? Behind closed doors, the comfortable lives of female Nazis. Recently, footage purportedly showing the private living quarters of female Nazi concentration camp guards has been making rounds. While initially described as CCTV footage, these visual records are actually historical photographs and documentary evidence from World War II that provide an unprecedented window into the lives of women who participated in the Holocaust. What these images reveal, fundamentally, changes our understanding of how ordinary people became perpetrators of genocide, showing a striking and disturbing contrast between the lives of concentration camp prisoners and their captors. Researchers have uncovered historical photographs, documentary films, and other visual records captured during or after the war that have been preserved in various archives and memorial sites. What makes these images so striking is what they reveal: the surprisingly comfortable and even pleasant living conditions of female Nazi guards, known as Aufseherinnen, who oversaw some of the Holocaust's most brutal atrocities. These records show a world of comfort that existed mere yards away from unimaginable suffering, forcing us to reconsider our understanding of how genocide becomes possible. Ravensbrück, established in 1939 near Berlin, was the largest concentration camp specifically for women in the German Reich. By the time of its liberation in 1945, it had imprisoned over 130,000 women from across Europe, with an estimated 50,000 dying there. The camp served a dual purpose, not only as a site of imprisonment and extermination, but also as the primary training ground for female SS guards who would later be deployed to other death camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau and Bergen-Belsen. The visual evidence shows that these female guards, recruited from various backgrounds, lived in conditions that would be unrecognizable to their prisoners. According to historical accounts, their accommodations at Ravensbrück were described as 8 solidly built, attractive villas with wooden shutters and balconies, offering views of a forest and a lake, with some guards even living there with their children. The contrast between these pleasantly appointed quarters and the squalid, overcrowded barracks where prisoners suffered could not be more profound. The physical description of these living spaces tells only part of the story. These weren't merely functional spaces. They were designed to provide comfort and a sense of normalcy to those directly participating in mass atrocities. The houses were constructed in what has been characterized as a 1940s Nazi version of medieval German cottages, complete with aesthetic touches that seem incomprehensible given their proximity to systematic murder. What's particularly striking about these quarters is how the Nazi regime itself documented them. The SS Photography Service recorded the guards' houses for an official album in 1940 or 1941, intended for internal propaganda purposes. These photographs, now part of the Ravensbrück Memorial Site's archives, show much more than just architectural details. They capture guards in their leisure time, smiling while having coffee and cake at home or walking in the nearby forest with their dogs. These weren't hardened monsters in their off hours, but rather young women, most in their 20s, with fashionable hairstyles, participating in seemingly normal daily activities. The physical arrangement of these quarters also reflected the strict hierarchical and gendered structure of the SS system. The female guards' quarters were deliberately separate from the men's, with specific accommodation types based on rank and status. Young, unmarried guards lived in apartments far from men's quarters, each holding at least 112 women, while private arrangements existed for married women and mothers. This separation from male personnel was strictly enforced, though historical records indicate that some guards, like Oberaufseherinnen Maria Mandl and Dorothea Binz, engaged in relationships with SS men, suggesting a level of social life within the camp system that runs counter to our typical understanding of these spaces. In a chilling reflection decades later, one former guard even described her time at Ravensbrück as the most beautiful time of my life, a statement that illustrates the profound psychological distance these women maintained from the suffering occurring just steps away from their comfortable homes. But who were these women who lived in these spaces while overseeing systematic cruelty cruelty. The female Guard Corps, numbering around 3,500 during the war, made up approximately 10% of all concentration camp guards. Their backgrounds might surprise you. Far from being ideological zealots, many were recruited from lower to middle-class backgrounds with limited education and few career opportunities. Many were remarkably young, in their late teens or early 20s, with previous occupations as kitchen maids, factory workers, or other low-status jobs. The SS offered them an opportunity that would have been otherwise unavailable: the chance to live away from home, with good pay, smart uniforms, and comfortable quarters. The salary for female guards was 185 RM per month, nearly double the average factory wage of 76 RM, making it an attractive proposition for many young women from working-class backgrounds. Importantly, these women weren't necessarily driven by deep ideological commitment. Less than 5% were Nazi Party members, suggesting that practical considerations, stable employment, better pay, and improved social status were often more significant motivating factors than political conviction. Of course, many had been influenced by Nazi propaganda through organizations like the Bund Deutscher Mädel, League of German Girls, which normalized racist and anti-Semitic views. Their training at Ravensbrück typically lasted between 1 and 6 weeks, later reduced to just 1 week as the war progressed, and included ideological indoctrination through anti-Semitic films like Judd Seuss, instruction in prisoner handling techniques, a loyalty oath to the SS, and a 3-month probation period with mentoring. This brief training period transformed ordinary women into enforcers of the camp system, with some adapting to the brutality in as little as 4 days. The roles these women played in the camps were varied but universally cruel. Their duties included conducting daily roll calls, allocating prisoners to work details, supervising barracks and labor activities, and maintaining order through punishment and intimidation. Some took on specialized roles like Hundeführerin, dog handler, Blockführerin, block leader, or Oberaufseherin, head female overseer, each with its own distinct responsibilities and level of authority. Though they were subordinate to male camp commandants and higher SS ranks, female guards wielded tremendous power over prisoners. While they typically didn't participate directly in mass killings like gassings or shootings, many were notorious for their extraordinary cruelty, engaging in physical abuse, withholding food, and forcing inmates to stand for hours in extreme weather. Some, like Irma Gries, nicknamed the Beautiful Beast of Belsen, became infamous for using implements like a cellophane whip and participating in lethal sterilization experiments. Hermin Braunsteiner, known as the Mare, earned her nickname for kicking prisoners to death with her steel-toed boots. Maria Mandl, who rose to become the head female guard at Auschwitz-Birkenau, was known for her brutality and sadistic enjoyment of selections for the gas chambers. These women weren't passive participants, they were active and often enthusiastic perpetrators of violence.
He loved blood, he loved barbarity, he loved killing. It all seemed so unreal. There was this girl who said to the female guard, "Madame, how long are we going to be traveling? There are dead bodies among us."
Yet the comfortable quarters where they lived show no trace of the horrors they inflicted during their working hours. The villas, with their homey interiors and pleasant views, created a physical and psychological barrier that allowed these women to compartmentalize their actions. They could participate in beatings, selections, and other forms of brutality during the day, then return to environments of comfort where they could pretend to lead normal lives. The unspeakable reality. Life for prisoners under female Nazi guards. While female Nazi guards enjoyed comfortable accommodations at Ravensbrück and other concentration camps, prisoners endured conditions deliberately designed to cause suffering, humiliation, and death. The striking contrast between these two realities, separated by only a few hundred yards, illustrates the profound dehumanization that enabled the Holocaust. To truly understand the significance of those guard quarters, we must confront the brutal conditions prisoners faced under the watch of female SS personnel. These women were imprisoned for various reasons under the Nazi racial hierarchy and political targeting. Many were political prisoners, socialists, communists, and resistance members. Others were Jews, Roma, often labeled as socials, Jehovah's Witnesses, those deemed criminals, those labeled work-shy, and women accused of race defilement for relationships with Jewish men. Each prisoner wore a colored triangle identifying their classification in the camp system, with Jews wearing an additional yellow triangle forming a Star of David. The physical conditions at Ravensbrück were deliberately abysmal. The camp's 18 barracks included housing, 2 sick bays, 2 warehouses, a penal block, and a camp prison. Prisoners slept on 3-tiered wooden bunks with 1 washroom and toilet per barrack. As the war progressed and overcrowding worsened, conditions deteriorated dramatically.
There were about 50 of us in a kettle truck with a bucket, that was it. We arrived in the middle of the night, and In Auschwitz, you could smell the fear.
Sanitation was practically non-existent. At Majdanek, for example, no sewage system existed until spring 1943, and prisoners were denied cleaning supplies. Water was scarce, preventing prisoners from washing themselves or their clothing, which became infested with fleas and lice. Daytime toilet facilities often consisted of unshielded sewage pits, while at night, prisoners used overfilled wooden containers in closed barracks, creating an unbearable stench. These conditions led to outbreaks of typhoid, a particularly lethal disease. Food rations were deliberately inadequate, causing chronic hunger and starvation. Prisoners typically received a daily ration of a watery vegetable soup and half a piece of bread, supplemented occasionally with a small portion of margarine or a bitter beverage, substituting for coffee. In Auschwitz, prisoners with less physically demanding tasks received approximately 1,300 calories per day, while those engaged in hard labor received about 1,700 calories, far below what was needed for survival under such conditions. Starvation was a leading cause of death, with many prisoners suffering from crippling abdominal pain, diarrhea, and extreme weight loss. Forced labor was a cornerstone of life at Ravensbrück and other camps. Prisoners were subjected to grueling work, both within the camp's industrial complex, where they performed tasks like sewing, weaving, and knotting, and in over 40 satellite camps, including 20 Siemens and Halske workshops focused on electronics manufacturing. By 1944, many worked in armaments production, embodying the Nazi principle of Vernichtung durch Arbeit, extermination through work. Ravensbrück served as the administrative center for these subcamps, which held over 70,000 predominantly female prisoners.
Day-to-day life, somehow one just took every day as it came. I worked in the market gardens. We were able to smuggle sometimes some of the fruit.
Female guards directly oversaw this brutal labor system, often using extreme violence to maintain productivity and control. Prisoners who failed to meet quotas or showed signs of weakness could face beatings, reduced rations, or selection for elimination. The guards' comfortable living conditions after supervising such brutal labor created a psychological distance that enabled them to compartmentalize their actions. Perhaps most horrifying were the systematic killings and medical experiments conducted at camps like Ravensbrück. SS authorities conducted periodic selections to identify weak or injured prisoners. Initially, these victims were shot, but from 1942, approximately 1,600 women and 300 men were sent to the Bernburg Euthanasia Center for gassing. About half were Jewish, with at least 25 Roma and 13 Jehovah's Witnesses among them. A second round of killings from 1942 to 1944 involved about 60 transports to Hartheim, each carrying 1,000 prisoners. In early 1945, as the war was ending, Ravensbrück constructed its own gas chamber, where 6,000 prisoners were gassed before the camp's liberation by Soviet troops in April 1945. Additional killing methods included lethal injections in the camp infirmary or transfers to Auschwitz-Birkenau for gassing. Ravensbrück was also the site of horrific medical experiments, primarily on women. Approximately 80 women, mostly Polish political prisoners, were subjected to experimental surgeries between 1942 and 1943, including sulfanilamide tests, bone transplants and amputation, and sterilization. Survivors of these experiments, known as rabbits because they were treated as laboratory animals, included individuals like Bogumila Jasuik, who endured multiple torturous procedures. Female guards were directly implicated in these atrocities. While they typically didn't perform the medical experiments or operate the gas chambers themselves, they participated in selections, escorted prisoners to their deaths, and maintained the system that enabled these killings. Their comfortable living quarters, just steps away from where these horrors occurred, highlight the psychological compartmentalization that allowed them to participate in genocide. Pregnant women and mothers faced particularly brutal treatment, as Nazi policy viewed their offspring as threats to the regime's racial ideology. Pregnant women were often sent to gas chambers upon arrival. If pregnancies were hidden and discovered later, newborns were typically killed by lethal injection or drowning. The only way to save the mother was through secret abortions or suffocating newborns to fake stillbirths, desperate measures taken by prisoner doctors trying to save at least one life. Some doctors, like Dr. Gisela Perl at Auschwitz, performed abortions without instruments or anesthesia on dirty floors to save mothers. For advanced pregnancies, she induced labor, resulting in infant deaths but saving the mothers. The total number of Jewish babies killed is unknown but estimated to be high. Only few dozen Jewish mothers were released alive with their newborns compared to hundreds of non-Jewish women. The psychological trauma inflicted on prisoners was equally devastating. Female guards employed various forms of psychological torture, from arbitrary punishments to public humiliations designed to break prisoners' spirits. The constant threat of violence, combined with starvation and disease, created an environment of profound psychological trauma. Prisoners were often separated from loved ones, subjected to public punishments, and forced to witness mass executions, including in gas chambers installed in camps like Auschwitz and Majdanek.
Mengele, whom you may have heard, was standing there and he looked at you and then sent you to the left or to the right. The left was the side for living and the right was the side for gas. I knew that our mother, because she didn't come to the left, she went to the right.
Lydia Tischler, who survived Auschwitz and other camps, reflected on this resilience.
I'm a survivor, which is something very different. We thought of them as inhuman. But I think they never made me feel that I'm less than human.
She continued.
And although the Germans were able to take away all my physical, almost everything, except my life, they left me alive, but you know, whatever could be removed from my body, they removed from my body. They couldn't remove my soul. They couldn't remove my integrity, my inner self that I managed to maintain.
The inhumane living conditions led to staggering mortality rates. Thousands died from exhaustion, starvation, exposure, and diseases like typhus and tuberculosis. In Ravensbrück alone, an estimated 92,000 of the 132,000 prisoners who passed through the camp died due to starvation, disease, overwork, executions, or medical experiments. Only a small fraction of those imprisoned survived. As Allied forces approached in the final stages of the war, camp authorities attempted to erase evidence of their crimes. At Ravensbrück, approximately 7,500 prisoners were evacuated by the International, Danish, and Swedish Red Cross to Sweden, Switzerland, and France in the final weeks. The remaining 20,000 were forced on death marches northwest, per Heinrich Himmler's orders. On April 30, 1945, Soviet troops liberated the camp, finding about 2,000 sick prisoners left behind. Many survivors died shortly after liberation due to their weakened state, and those who survived faced long-term physical and psychological trauma. The liberators were often unprepared for what they discovered. American soldier Leon Bass, who was among the first US troops to arrive at Buchenwald, recalled,
"I can never forget that day, because when I walked through that gate, I saw in front of me what I call the walking dead. I saw human beings that had been beaten, had been starved, had been tortured. They'd been denied everything. They had skeletal faces with deep-set eyes. Their heads had been clean-shaved, and they were standing there and they were holding on to one another just to keep from falling."
Dehumanization involves perceiving others as less than human, often by comparing them to animals or objects, which reduces empathy and justifies cruelty. In concentration camps, guards' actions reflected this mindset. Hermine Braunsteiner's habit of kicking prisoners to death with her leather boots emphasized the power asymmetry, degrading prisoners and treating them as subhuman. Even passive behaviors, like Herta Ehlert forcing prisoners to sing all day while ignoring nearby mass murders, demonstrated a lack of empathy rooted in dehumanization. For survivors, liberation was a moment of profound emotional complexity. While it meant freedom from torture and the possibility of survival, for many, it was also the moment they realized they were completely alone in the world, that their families had been murdered and their communities destroyed. Helen Greenbaum, who survived imprisonment in the Warsaw Ghetto, forced labor at several camps, including Majdanek and Ravensbrück, and a death march to Dachau, recalled the moment of liberation.
They opened all the gates, and we started on all four, because they let us know that the soldiers are coming. And we went out to greet the American soldiers, and we dropped to their feet and we kissed their boots. Some of them that couldn't walk, they were just crawling. They picked up and carried them into the camps.
Anton Mason, who was about 18 when liberated by American soldiers at Buchenwald after surviving Auschwitz, where most of his family was murdered, described the moment.
I found out my father was dead, and I was truly at the end of my rope. I said, I don't know if I can go on. But there is something that's just impossible to explain. I just decided that I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try. And then, out of no place, on April 11th, the Americans arrived. I couldn't believe it. I said, how is this possible? I walked over to a GI, and young guy, and I asked him if he could give me some food. I'm very hungry. So he gave me a Nestle bar, and he gave me a little gold envelope. It said Nescafe. I didn't know what it was.
While American, British, and Soviet soldiers were moved to compassion and frequently broke down in tears at the sight of camp survivors, female guards had maintained their cruelty despite living in close proximity to this suffering for years. Aftermath and understanding. As Allied forces liberated the concentration camps in the final months of World War II, the world began to reckon with the horrors of the Holocaust. For female Nazi guards who had lived comfortably while overseeing atrocities, this moment marked the collapse of their dual existence. The striking contrast between their pleasant living quarters and the hellish conditions they imposed on prisoners raises profound questions about justice, accountability, and human nature. What happened to these women after the war, and what can their story teach us about preventing future genocides? When the Third Reich fell in May 1945, female guards at camps like Ravensbrück faced various fates. Some were captured at the camps where they worked, while others fled, attempting to blend back into civilian society. Of the approximately 3,700 women who served as concentration camp guards, only a small fraction ever faced formal justice for their actions. The first wave of accountability came through Allied military tribunals in the immediate aftermath of the war. The Hamburg-Ravensbrück trials, conducted by British authorities between 1946 and 1948, resulted in the conviction of 16 individuals for war crimes and crimes against humanity, with several sentenced to death. Among those executed were some of the most notorious female guards, including Dorothea Binns, who had served as chief warden at Ravensbrück. The Belsen trials in 1945 similarly saw justice for some of the most brutal female perpetrators. Irma Gresser, often called the beautiful beast of Belsen for her sadistic treatment of prisoners, was sentenced to death and hanged at the age of 22, along with Elisabeth Volkenrath and Johanna Bormann. At the Krakow Auschwitz trial in 1947, Maria Mandl, who had risen to become the head female overseer at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Therese Brandl were executed for their crimes. In the French occupation zone, trials between 1946 and 1950 saw Ravensbrück's commandant Fritz Suren and deputy Hans Pflaum sentenced to death and executed in 1950. Female guards who had worked under their command also faced justice in these proceedings, though often with lighter sentences than their male counterparts. However, the vast majority of female camp guards were never held accountable. Many successfully concealed their wartime activities and reintegrated into post-war German society. Their ordinary appearances and the prevailing gender stereotypes that women were naturally less violent than men sometimes helped them evade suspicion or serious investigation. The comfortable, normal-seeming quarters where they had lived during the war mirrored the ordinary lives many returned to after its end. Some cases of delayed justice emerged decades later. Perhaps the most notable was that of Hermine Braunsteiner, nicknamed the Mare for her habit of kicking prisoners to death. After the war, she married an American and moved to Queens, New York, living as a housewife. In 1964, Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal identified her, leading to her denaturalization and extradition to Germany in 1973, the first Nazi criminal extradited from the United States. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1981, but released in 1996 due to health issues before dying in 1999. Another guard, Elfriede Rinkel, who had worked with attack dogs at Ravensbrück, lived quietly in San Francisco for over 50 years before being discovered and deported in 2006. Her Jewish husband had died never knowing about her Nazi past. These cases highlight how many female perpetrators successfully concealed their involvement in atrocities, sometimes for decades. When brought to trial, many female guards employed similar defense strategies. Some claimed they were just following orders or had no choice but to participate in the camp system. Others downplayed their role, insisting they were unaware of the worst atrocities or merely performed administrative functions. A few, like Herta Ehlert, described their time at camps like Ravensbrück as never such a good life during her 1945 trial, showing a disturbing lack of remorse or recognition of their victims' suffering. These women's ability to compartmentalize their actions and maintain a sense of normalcy within their comfortable quarters appears to have continued into the post-war period. The psychological distance they had maintained between their role as perpetrators and their self-image as ordinary women persisted, allowing many to avoid confronting the moral implications of their participation in genocide. The contrast between the comfortable living conditions of female guards and the suffering of their victims has has been preserved at memorial sites like Ravensbrück, which was established as a memorial site in 1959 in what was then East Germany. The former SS headquarters has housed a museum since 1984, and the site includes exhibitions on the female guards, including one launched in 2004 specifically exploring their roles. Some of the former guard accommodations now serve as a youth hostel and meeting center, creating an educational opportunity to explore the psychology of perpetration. In 2020, an exhibition titled In the SS Auxiliary, the Female Guards of the Ravensbrück Women's Concentration Camp was launched, focusing on the female guards' milieu, including the cozy interiors of the buildings where the female guards lived, and the dichotomy of crime scene and place of residence. This exhibition draws on the camp's archives, which include collections related to former SS personnel and female guards. These memorial efforts highlight how the physical spaces where perpetrators lived can serve as powerful educational tools. By preserving both prisoner barracks and guard quarters, sites like Ravensbrück allow visitors to physically experience the striking contrast between victims' and perpetrators' conditions, prompting reflection on how ordinary people could participate in extraordinary evil. The institutional structure of the camps, with guards rewarded with comfortable living quarters while prisoners suffered, reinforced this normalization of violence. Survivor testimonies offer crucial insights into these dynamics. Lydia Tischler, reflecting on her time in concentration camps, observed,
All of us have the capacity to be sadistic and horrible to other people. We managed to not do it, but the potential for destructiveness is in all of us. I actually believe that people are born neither good nor bad, and that the badness is something that is the way that one is treated as a child.
This perspective challenges simplistic views of perpetrators as inherently evil and instead points to the complex interplay of individual psychology, social influence, and institutional structures that enable atrocities. If you enjoyed this video, click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.